Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Casey Fineff, and I'm the Director of Client Services here at Blue Hill Research. It's my pleasure to be a part of today's webcast, Building a Highly Agile, Impactful, and Respected Analytics Center of Excellence, brought to you by Blue Hill Research and LavaStorm. Before I introduce today's speakers, I'd like to point out a few features on the BrightTalk platform. On the right-hand side of the screen, we encourage you to ask questions or provide feedback at any time. We'll be addressing your questions at the end of the presentation as time permits. You'll also find in the attachment section a copy of today's slides, and the full report are available for you to download. Our first speaker today is James Height. James is a principal analyst at Blue Hill Research, focusing on analytics, and will be presenting his key themes and findings from his recent research. Next, we have Mark Marinelli. Mark is currently the Chief Technology Officer at LavaStorm, where he brings over 20 years of industry experience to the role with a focus on product innovation and strategy. Mark will be talking about the current challenges that exist and how to overcome those challenges. So we're excited to bring this content to you, and with that, I will turn it over to our first presenter, James Height.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm James Height, and Casey, thanks for the introduction. Welcome, everyone, and for those of you familiar with Blue Hill and some of the webinars we've put on, welcome back. And for those of you who are new to us, we'll give you a little bit of background and context onto what we're all about and what we're about here today. But quick agenda just to give you an overview of what we're hoping to cover here. A little bit about Blue Hill, sort of how we go about our research. Talk about the research that we actually did and why we think it matters to you, how it's going to impact you, what you can bring back to your job and hopefully improve from there. And then some analysis, some takeaways, and then the conclusion from my research. And then after that, I'm going to hand it over to Mark, who will drive it home with the LavaStorm perspective and some additional context to that end. So excited to have you guys with us, and we'll jump right in. So anyone who's familiar with Blue Hill, like I said, welcome back. But those of you who aren't, we're an enterprise research, a technology research firm. We help people make the right technology decisions. And what we love doing is the lens that we focus a lot of our research on is focusing on that investment decision point. Who did you select and why? And then what was the business return? What was the return on your investment that you got out of that? So that's kind of the lens and the context that we view the world from, and I think it's just useful background information for you guys to have in your pocket as we go through this presentation here today. So a little bit about the research, the reason why we're all here. Look, it's no secret, the big data revolution, everyone wants to become a data-driven enterprise. And in order to do this, and unlock this value that everyone loves talking about, and certainly I'm guilty of that as well, people view building an analytics center of excellence as a great way to be an engine of growth and to drive success throughout their organization and to advance this vision. But the problem is, it's really hard to build a great center of excellence. It's really easy to build one that's underfunded, underutilized, underwhelming, underappreciated, something that sort of becomes, rather than the engine of success, sort of an accessory to your analytics initiatives. And so what we want to understand is, if there's such value in building an analytics COE, how do you actually get there? And one of the fun things I get to do here at Blue Hill is I talk to a whole lot of people who are struggling, who have had success, et cetera. And, I use these, this sort of background experience as a baseline, but we want to launch a very dedicated study and talk to, some of the best. We talked to some top consultancies, some, very large firms that you guys are familiar with, like McKinsey, and some system integrators like E&Y, talked to some Fortune 100, some multinational organizations, and what we wanted to do was distill the common themes and what's that blueprint for success, understand what the best people are doing and where they stumbled and where it ultimately drove them to having some success from their investments, and that's what we wanted to bring here to you guys. So that's what we did, and the manifestation of this is we actually produced a full research report. So if what we're talking about here is interesting to you guys and you want to follow up, dig in a little deeper, learn a little bit more, everyone on this webinar actually, I believe, has an opportunity to download a complimentary copy of the report. So, please dig in, follow up with any questions. Would love to chat. But yeah, so absolutely, that's sort of the deeper dive, and happy to discuss that with you guys later if you so choose. But now on to the good stuff. What were sort of the findings that we were able to take away and hopefully pass on to you guys? And I think the big thing that struck us first is that when people don't know what a successful analytics COE looks like or what it should look like in their organization, they tend to build it in the image of a traditional IT organization. And what I mean by that is, it's very centralized. There's a team set up that, their goal is to support a couple different business functions. It sometimes takes the persona of like a deli counter. You take your ticket and you wait in line and your request gets serviced in the order that it comes in. And that's the way that a lot of folks are building these. And we've noticed that it's not really the right way to get to success, to be able to drive that transformational change. If you're spending your time trying to figure out how to prioritize and navigate all these different bosses that you might have, and everyone's coming to you and all their priorities are of course the most important. If you're spending time figuring that out, you're not spending time solving your company's data challenges, and that in itself is a little bit of a lost opportunity. But also you sort of get this order-taking mentality where you're not proactively going out and solving problems. You're solving someone else's problems as they come into you. So that's sort of what we noticed, and I have a list of challenges that we heard from people. And if this sounds like you, this is perhaps an indication that maybe there's a better way out there. If you find yourself, like I said before, understaffed, underfunded, and under-resourced, underwhelming generally, or you backlog with too many requests, you don't know how to prioritize and navigate this. These are very real challenges that a lot of other people are having. And with their first iteration of building an analytics COE, this is what they're running into, and it's not really yielding the results that they hoped they would find. So the next piece is, of course, what do you actually do? What did we find out that successful people did that you guys can take away? And it really comes down to what we found is this idea of people, process, and technology. And for most of you on the call, I'm sure you've heard this, and you know that it's an age-old adage, right? And so what could I possibly learn from it? But we bring it up because the order is so important. You have to have the people in place first, then you have to have the right process, and we're going to talk a lot about what it means to be agile and why that's so important. And then after you get those in place, then you outfit people with the right tools. I think the way to think about this is even the best tools in the world, if you don't have the right people who know how to use them, it's not going to give you very much benefit. I mean, example, right? If you gave me the best golf clubs in the world, I'm still going to hit into the water every single time. But if you gave Phil Mickelson a hockey stick, he's probably still going to beat me, right? So it's this idea of even if you have the right people, at least the right people, even if you give them suboptimal tools, they're still going to find a way, right? So it's really about doing this in order because it's so important. And the last piece here on this slide is we saw this time and time again. A common stumbling block is people don't plan for what happens when they are successful. We're going to talk a lot about why Agile is so important, and it's this mantra of failing fast, rapid iteration, prototyping. But what happens after you try and build this analytics application? It's very successful, and people say, great, let's scale it out to the whole organization. If you don't already have a plan in place, the headcount, the money, the executive buy-in, whatever it might be, you're going to fall down, right? So you want to plan for success before you have it. And it seems obvious, but we see so many people miss it. So you might make sure you want to have this sort of if-then plan for after your initial prototypes gain the traction that they deserve, and you want to scale it out to your organization. So the first piece to the puzzle that we talked about, right, in this sort of people, process, technology paradigm, is getting the right people in place. Don't sleep on this, right? It's more than the tired old cliche that I'm sure some of you guys are thinking about on the call right now. But look, if you want to build a really well-respected analytics center of excellence that is taking on your most difficult challenges in data, you need the smartest, most hardworking people in your company solving the hardest challenges in your company. So you need to create an environment where you attract and retain A players, right? And the way you do this is not by having them be order takers and by sort of passively working on other people's projects. It's giving them ownership of the project, the authority to go in to a line of business to work with them to say, understand what their problems are and say, I'm going to solve this and I'm going to work with you on this rather than waiting for someone to come with you with their problems. And ultimately, you need to give people in your COE the opportunity to take ownership of the success and the failures or the outcomes. Right, there's a big reason why consulting firms are known to have, some of the smartest people in the world working for them, right? Like Bain or McKinsey or BCG. They offer an environment where one, really smart people are attracted to working with other really smart, talented people, and then two, they're constantly, the intellectual stimulation is always there because they're working on hard challenges that are constantly changing. So you want to mimic this environment in your own analytics center of excellence to at least set this foundation to get the right people to set that stage for the transformational change that we all want to bring through analytics. So the next piece, right, is the right process. And we're going to say, be agile. And a lot of you people, everyone on the call is probably saying, oh, that's great, but what does that, what does that actually mean? And we're going to talk about that for a little bit here. And certainly, anyone familiar with agile software development, there's different shades of meaning. But what we mean here, and what we distilled from talking to all these folks and seeing so many things in action, is what we mean is we're talking about shorter feedback loops. We're talking about constant iteration. We're talking about rapidly prototyping and collaborating between the business side and the technical teams that are building the solutions. And the reason for this is it's so important, right? Collaboration is the name of the game because the world of business is constantly changing. The constraints of how the applications can actually provide value in the real world are constantly changing. Just imagine a new regulation is passed in a certain state. If you're a nationwide insurer, you have to make sure to adjust your analytic applications to account for these new changes on the fly. And any time that's lost between adjusting to this, is time that you didn't spend adding value, right? It's time you spent playing catch up. Really awesome anecdote that has stuck with me. I was speaking with a gentleman who was working for a pretty high-powered blue chip consultancy, and the U.S. Post Office brought in him and his team to build out an algorithm to help them better sort their mail, right? And they spent months and millions of dollars and tons of man hours and all sorts of resources, and they came up with the perfect algorithm that was able to sort the mail. It was 30% faster, just huge efficiency gains. And when they brought it to production, the post office said, that is awesome, but we legally can't do this on the daily basis that your algorithm requires. We're stuck on this weekly basis because of just sort of the bylaws and the institution of what we're dealing with. And so what they had spent so much time and money and resources on became utterly useless, right? And of course, had they known ahead of time and worked collaboratively with the team, they could have avoided this mistake. And that's a rather extreme example of something that happens, look at it as a representative example of something that happens on a micro level all the time in organizations. So you need to make sure you have these mechanisms where you're able to collaborate very tightly between the technical people building a solution and trying to solve these problems and the people who are actually implementing it and stewarding it towards actually providing value and outcomes for you. So this quote here, I won't read the whole thing, but I think it's just so perfect. It sums up sort of the gist of what we're trying to get at and sets the stage for the later portion here. But I was talking with this very smart man, John Ackred. He's the CTO at Silicon Valley Data Science. Really, really cool company. And they work with some of the biggest companies in the world trying to help them solve the hardest challenges that they just can't, data challenges that they can't possibly do on their own. And he has this great quote. He said, hey, look, you try and get people to understand that data science, it's a probabilistic exercise. You don't know what you're going to find until you actually try it. And that's why it tracks well to Agile approaches, right? This is something where you need to fail 1, 2, 3, 4 times, experiment, and sometimes you find out that maybe it's the fifth model that that you finally get it right, or perhaps there's no pattern at all or no solution. And so what you need to do is you need to have this ability to provide a context to experiment and to fail and to prototype without being constrained by the sort of the no failure left to right problem solving that we're all so accustomed to. And so, really the big takeaway is, look, if we're trying to solve these new challenges with data and this new method of problem solving, if we're going to retrofit it into our old school method of trying to productionalize and solve problems and think through things, of course there's going to be friction points. So what we need is a new framework that allows us to really get the value out of the resources we put into our data science, into our analytics COEs. And so, what is this framework? We recommend this, and all the folks that we talk to either successfully use some variation of this or recommend it to their clients in some variation. We like calling it the factory and the lab, and what it really boils down to is having this mechanism where you have this sort of a team that is given the freedom to experiment, to try new things, that's not burdened with this idea that failure is costly, sort of on the left, and then once they're able to build a prototype, you have this function in the middle that translates it from, essentially science experiment to production, right? We call it the factory. And, this has a lot of advantages, not the least of which is your data scientists or the people doing the really complex analytic problems. They don't want to be constrained by trying to figure out, how do we stand this up on our servers? How do we make this work 10,000 times? They're not even the people you want thinking about that. Rather, you'd rather have these people in the factory who are really good, who can leverage this institutional knowledge, who are pros at taking things from, like I said, science experience and matching it to the actual business processes in production. So thinking about it this way conceptually, we have seen be very successful. I think allows you to give a lot of freedom and some autonomy and to solve these challenging problems while still giving you a way to implement it much faster and get to results much quicker than that traditional left to right approach that we so often love to fall into. So the next piece, right, is we got the people, we have the process, and now we need the tools. And the most important thing to take away is this translation mechanism is absolutely the most important thing that you can have. This is the area that you need to find first, and finding the right people for this is really difficult, right? It's hard to find someone who has an appreciation for the technical side as well as the business side, who knows both. So it's really difficult to find those people or to staff your team with the right people. So your option really is, instead of going out on a witch hunt for these rare beings, what you'd rather do is bring in tools that are able to augment the capabilities of the folks that you do have. So long as they have the right mindset and skill set and the opportunity, the willingness to push forward in the manner that you want to, augmenting their skills to give them these translation capabilities is absolutely the way to go. And we'll talk a little bit more about the visual analytic application tools in a little bit, and Mark will go into more detail on that in his section. So we'll leave that there for now. But look, what you want to do is you want to be able to solve this translation function while avoiding the sort of question on the bottom left here, right? It's really hard to find the right data scientists, and even if you do find them, they're too expensive, or I don't have the right things for them to work on, whatever it is, and maybe you're right. Maybe it is really hard to find the right people for the team. So what you want to be able to do, what you can control, is augmenting them and complementing the existing skill sets that you do have. So that brings us more to what I alluded to on the previous slide. Okay, well, you still haven't told us what tools we need and what tools people are using to be successful. And what we've found, and over and over again, is people who are really successful, a lot of them bring in these visual analytic application solutions, right? They develop the analytic applications in a way that shows the workflow visually, so you can see where the data is coming from, what you are doing to the data, and where it goes, and what you're combining it with, and sort of end outcome, and then you're able to push that into production. And it has a number of advantages, and the principal one that I want to tie back to what we've been talking about is it enables you to better collaborate between the technical side and the business side of what you're doing. Because as we mentioned before, a lot gets lost in translation. You try and build a tech, the business side gives you the tech specs, your technical team goes back, builds it, they come back 2 or 3 months later only to find out that, it was off. So it's back to the drawing board and try and do it again. So you can mitigate these risks and this time loss by this tight collaboration. And so if you're a technical user, the technical team trying to explain what you're doing or trying to get feedback, it's much better to communicate with the business user who can see a visual workflow rather than having them stare at code, right? If they're looking at a screen of code, they're not going to be able to visualize what's actually happening to the data, and you're going to sort of perpetuate these translation issues. So This is what we found people using as a great way to shrink this gap, a really useful resource and tools that people brought in. And then the last bit here is just taking it one step further. I would challenge you guys to consider the implications for Agile ETL, right? So many of the data challenges that we see people use or run into, it's a matter of, how do I unite these data sources from all over the place? How do I clean my CRM data and combine it with some of my sales data and my ERP data and all this, and how do I do that in any sort of way that's efficient? And these visual application tools, they give you the opportunity to see what's happening to the data and give you a much more repeatable, easy fashion to extend this in and to ultimately, get to the outcome that you want much quicker in an agile manner rather than this left to right waterfall manner that we so often see. So to highlight this, I'm going to dive a little bit more into that Agile ETL use case that I just brought up. We had an opportunity to talk to a number of folks throughout this and some manufacturing firms, and there's one that I just really love the story about, right? There's a multinational manufacturing firm, and they sort of have this mandate. All right, we need to make better decisions about our entire production process using data. And how do we go about doing this? It's really hard because especially in the manufacturing sector, they need to unite data from a whole bunch of different sources. I mentioned before, they have products in production, in customer service. They have products that are, still in R&D. How do you manage something across all this when you have all these different systems keeping track of the data and all act as silos? And of course, right, there's a lot of operational technology, and some people are keeping dates in the European format, some people are keeping dates in the American format. You got people keeping time in military time. Whatever it is, anything small to huge, it's a nightmare to unite all this data. And they initially try to solve it just like any of us might, right? They assemble a team to go look at it and talk to all the different line of business constituents, and they put something together. And then after a couple months, they come back and find out where they missed and go back to the drawing board and try and do it. And they really found, hey, look, this is not the most efficient way we could do this. There's got to be a better way, right? This is very time consuming. This is using up a ton of resources. So what they did is they brought in these visual analytic application development platforms, right? And they assembled an agile team whose job it was is to build prototypes working with each of the line of business who understood the context of the data and understood, what specific numbers mean in the context of this business unit where they might be different. The same numbers could mean something totally different in a different business unit. And they were able to bring it together, and they build prototypes, and then they run each of these prototypes through sprints. And then after it reaches this validation of enough sprints, they're able to bring it directly into production. And the end result is that they're able to bring very successful applications into production that they already know are correct and will add value in a matter of weeks or months, as opposed to something that would take, a quarter or a half a year. And so I really think there's tremendous benefit to this for folks, especially in this very base level Agile ETL case where uniting disparate data sources together is one of the key challenges. Is an absolute foundation for success of what you're trying to do. So I thought that really nicely highlighted it as a good way to sort of wrap that up. But what I want to do now, just sort of go over a few of the takeaways, and I won't repeat what I said, but I'll sort of combine some of the key points into what they might mean for you guys as you take away and go back to your day jobs. Right. Look, it's all about setting the stage with the right people, setting the stage with the agile approach, and then investing in the tools that you need. There's this mantra, right? Start small, fail fast, build on what works. This is how your analytics center of excellence is going to get up and running, going proactively to different business units, understanding their problems, and then solving it with them, not waiting for people to come to you. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, look, you're going to need to plan for success before you have success, because a lot of people don't. They say, all right, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But, that's a bit of a, that's definitely a trap that people fall into. If you don't have the funding, the headcount, you don't have the cubicles, you don't have the laptops, you don't have the people. Look, you're going to fall on hard times. You wouldn't launch a product without having the the right team in place, right? If you're launching a new product and you didn't have the sales team to sell it, the customer support team to support it, or the accounting team to make sure that you actually took in the money from the products you sold, that's a recipe for disaster. So why would you put your analytics center of excellence in the same position, right? So just keep that in the forefront of your mind as you go through trying to prove value. And then again, look, we talked a lot about building this agile process. The factory and the lab approach, absolutely something that we recommend, that we have seen work. Really a great way to do this, and also builds in a way to have a robust translation mechanism that we think is the most important piece to the puzzle, right? Invest in the tools that are going to augment the existing skill set you have, and make sure that you have a way to get constant feedback loops from business to the technical team and vice versa, because it's a two-way street, and just collaboration, iteration, absolutely key to success. And finally, how do you actually take this in a very actionable set, right? Invest in the right tools. We talked about this. Mark's going to dive more into this, but there's real merit in having these visual displays of your analytic workflows when you're trying to communicate to the business side, as opposed to having to just stare at screens of code, right? And ultimately what we found, and this is sort of my last point here before I turn it over to Mark, but look, the people who are able to do this, a lot of them went from either nothing to this really important engine to success, and some people went from this cost center, right? They were viewed as sort of the people that solve some problems, right? And they were able to shift themselves from just being order takers to being proactive drivers of success. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you give the people in your analytics COE the authority to seek out new projects, to take on responsibility, and success is incumbent on them to prove the value, that's how you're going to drive that transformational change and unlock the potential of big data problem solving that we also want to get to. So with that, I'm going to stop there. Happy to come back to any questions you guys might have in the Q&A period. I'm going to hand it over now to Mark.
All right, thanks, James, and thanks again for everyone who's joined us. James has shared with you the results of a broad set of research that he's done in a whole bunch of different audiences. I'm going to narrow the focus for the next segment to LavaStorm and its customers. As a provider of analytical software platform, which is used to build all of these applications, and one which was purpose-built for an Agile approach, we've got a lot of customers who are at different stages of maturity in their analytical practice, and we've seen over the last few years the movement towards a center of excellence, towards centralizing some of the competency and sharing it across multiple business units. So we've seen a lot of this. We've seen where people have succeeded and where they've sort of stumbled out of the gates. And I'm going to share a bit of what we've learned across our customer base, and also share one customer use case of how this works, when it's successful. If I get down to the root cause analysis of where people have stumbled, James talked about people, processes, and tools. Ours is a little bit different framing, but it's really the same overarching theme. I would say that there is a challenge in that people are not adopting an Agile mindset, meaning that they really have to kind of change the way they think about solving business problems and break with some of the inertial, traditional ways that they've done this. They need to expand and in some ways consolidate their skill set, that they've got multiple different people in their in the line of business, in IT, anybody who's going to be working on this that have different experience, that have different knowledge, and that have different levels of technical skill, and they need to be corralled so that they can all cumulatively emulate that one person that you'd love that had all of those skills. That's exceedingly hard to find. And last, if you adopt an Agile mindset and an Agile skill set, all of that doesn't work very well unless you've chosen the right tools that were built to facilitate the types of working practices, processes that are necessary to be successful. Now, drilling into each of those in turn. The first one, what is that? What do I mean in business as usual? What's a mindset challenge? What mindset is getting in the way of people being able to be more successful in standing up a COE? One of them is just resistance from business users. Any COE is going to be a collaborative endeavor between IT or technical users who own the data, who own a lot of the technical skill set, and the line of business who understands the implications of the data and the analysis better. They're closer to the problem, but oftentimes don't have the skill set to self-serve. These people have been trying to work together for a long time, and oftentimes it doesn't work. There's sort of there's a trust barrier because the line of business has so often been used to waiting on IT to get them the results and the data that they need, and IT's waiting on the line of business to clarify its requirements so that they don't have to do this 3 or 4 times. That has produced a sort of a lack of cooperation and collaboration. There's a trust factor there. Silos. If we're going to build a center of excellence, we want to work across all of the different lines of business. That's the whole point of centralizing competency. And that's difficult because each department often has its own data marts. They're not used to working with each other. They work within the department, but they don't work across departments. And that's going to be essential as we try to learn things from Project A in Department A to Project C in Department C, where somewhere we have to leverage what we learned from the first department to the second department. We need them to talk to each other. They're not used to doing that. Lastly, this is the most sort of inertial thing, is that typically for years and years and years, forever, we've been using a waterfall approach. Agile has really only seen more recent adoption, really starting in the manufacturing world, the software development world, and now out into the business world. And what do I mean by waterfall? Waterfall is you're going to stand up a project, you gather requirements, you go and interview all of the people who are going to be using the outcome, you gather all of the requirements, you try to gather all of the data, you build some infrastructure, and months later out comes the first drip feed of results, which can be wrong because something has changed in between the time when you first started having this conversation to the time that you can produce the results, or can be wrong because only when someone sees the first iteration of results do they recognize that they gave you imperfect or incomplete requirements. You sometimes don't know what questions to ask until you've seen the answer to your first question. That's a waterfall approach, a protracted cycle of months and months of project time, and it's just with us because that's basically how we've operated for a long time. You need to break through that cycle by explaining that there's a better way. So there's a mindset, sort of traditional set of not really explicit objections, but just sort of the way we've been doing things that can be a hindrance. On the skill set side, as we've talked about a few times, you've got 3 major categories of users who are going to have to build something together. You've definitely got your technical users, your data brokerage. You've definitely got your business users, who've got the analytical mind and the problem that they need to solve. More recently, you've also injected, if you're lucky, a data scientist because you're going after higher order advanced analytics. You need somebody who's got a big brain for math. These 3 people come from different perspectives. They have different skill sets and they have different knowledge. Typically, this is broad brush, but typically the business user is not going to be familiar with the rudiments of data hygiene and data integrity and building databases that an IT user is going to have. Conversely, the IT user understands the format and shape of the data very much, but is not necessarily going to understand how to interpret those data as well as a business user who works with these data every day. The data scientist, again, I'm sort of stereotyping here, but a data scientist knows their math very well and knows how to build complex models, but they're probably not inculcated with a lot of the end user, the end business user's knowledge of the problem set, and they're often not someone who's going to be drilling down into a data warehouse and being able to self-serve. So these people all have to work together. And because they have different technical skills, they tend to choose different tools. The business user may use something that's really agile and allows them to ask a lot of questions of their data, but it's really not going to be potent enough when their use cases exceed a certain level of data complexity and analytical complexity. The tech user is going to want to use something more powerful, but what they use is going to be inscrutable to the business user. The data scientist is often using yet a third set of tools because they need tools that are purpose-built for their needs. So 3 different people with 3 different sets of knowledge and 3 different sets of technical skill, to get them to collaborate it's just hard. Lastly, if we have been trying to solve this problem autonomously, independently, outside of a center of excellence, there's been a lot of organic tool selection. Each department has tried to solve this problem. Maybe they've got a copy of Tableau or Click, and they're doing a lot of great visualization work. And underneath that, they've got a few spreadsheets. But each department may have a different Viz tool or a different spreadsheet. They've got some under-the-desk databases, and those are coded up in different dialects of their own SQL style and everything like that. They've tried to build their own tool chain, and they've done so in sort of a heterogeneous menagerie of different tools. That's going to be hard if we're going to try to get everybody to standardize around a common tool set that the SOE believes is best purposed to solve these problems. Another thing is that if you've got an Agile approach out somewhere in, say, visualization and reporting and the end state of some of what you're trying to do, but you're going after a thornier problem set that requires more data out of the centralized brokerage, if you've chosen an Agile approach in the end state and you've chosen a waterfall approach in how you provision the data, if you haven't appropriated an Agile mindset to doing ETL in an Agile tool set, then you're still doing waterfall work. Because that's the lowest common denominator is actually getting people the data that they need. If that's a waterfall thing, it's all waterfall. Slows you down. The other thing is that these tools were not built with collaboration in mind. Nobody's Agile by themselves. They have to be collaborating with other people. Definitionally, that's what makes Agile work. And that rapid iteration between various users to test and validate and then build and refine everything that they're doing requires collaboration. When someone gets to a certain point in an analytical project and says, I don't understand this answer, or I need to know where this came from, and the response is, well, that's easy. That's column 6 in row 5 of spreadsheet 3. That's where I derived that from. Or here's my very well-documented SQL script. That's where it came from. That's not going to work. You need tools that allow people with those mixed skill sets to build things together and to share these things and build upon continuously leveraging the knowledge that they've gained from each interaction. These tools just don't do that. So that's the problem, drilling into the 3 major facets of mindset, skill set, and tool set. What does it look like if it's successful? When I'm going to talk about the Agile COE and the solution to all of those problems, I want to talk about kind of how this would work in practice. Going to have some centralization. On the left side, we've got the center of excellence, the technical skill users who know how to wrangle all of this data together and feed it out into the right side, the line of business with whom they're going to collaborate to build these analytical applications. They need Agile tools. They need a combination of Agile ETL tools to get all of these data sources together and provision the simplified data sets that the end users can use in their Agile analytics tools, tools that allow them to self-serve once they've been given a set of data, to continually iterate and ask a whole bunch of questions of those data, produce reports, collaborate with each other. If you've got everybody working in an agile way, if they're continually asking new questions of the data, recognizing that they need new or different data, and then very quickly can get that new or different data, ask more questions, realize that they got it wrong, we got to go in a different direction, I need new data, or I need to change my analytical model, Mr. Data Scientist. If you do that, then over time you're going to develop a wonderful pattern of accretion of knowledge. You start off, let's say the first project on the top there, we're experimenting. We're trying to figure out what's the best way to gather all these data, what data do we need, and how are we going to ask questions of those data. We're in experiment R&D mode, James's lab, when he was talking earlier about the lab versus the factory. We get it wrong a few times, but then we get it right. And then the next time we go to a new project, we're going to refine that. There's going to be some variance in how Project 2 is going to use maybe that same data set, maybe some variance in the way that they're going to ask that same question that will allow us to refine our requirements. By the time we get to the third time around, where someone is asking basically the same question of basically the same data, we have codified that in reusable assets. So to provision that data and to allow somebody to ask those questions is as easy as dragging something off the shelf and putting it in the application. We're not starting all over again. Essentially, if we get this right, every time we stand up a new project, every time somebody asks a question, it should be the best way that anybody across the organization has ever asked that question. There are some great outcomes here in that you have consistency in the way that people are using the data, consistency in the way that we're provisioning the data. You have balanced control and centralization with self-service and decentralization because you're not getting in people's way. You're allowing them to experiment up front. You're not presuming in the waterfall approach this a priori understanding of all the questions that anybody's going to ask and all of the data that they're going to need, and then putting that on guardrails and not really allowing people to work outside of those guardrails. Fine, let's it's sort of free up front as we're in the experimentation phase, but over time we sort of mitigate how much experimentation needs to happen outside of the curated set of logic and data, and everybody just gets smarter. And also very, very importantly with the Agile approach and the COE approach is that Project 1, by the time we get to Project 3, we're going to have learned a whole bunch of stuff. We don't only want Project 3 to benefit from that. We don't want to leave Project 1 behind. And that's another one of the precepts of Agile is that you're continually refining. You're never done. There's not an end state where we can pack up our bags and say Project 1 is finished, because we're just going to continue to learn, things are going to continue to change, and we need to retrofit those old projects. The easiest way to do that is to have all of the projects being dependent on or implementing shared and updated, refined logic. So the flip side of all these challenges that I talked about, we've seen this across our customer base. The mindset, if you can change the mindset and have people start thinking that they're going to be, that there's going to be responsiveness, that they're not going to wait in a big long queue behind everybody else's projects before they're going to be able to see any value delivered from a project. That's fantastic. If you can get people collaborating and working together, accuracy goes way up. That's an inducement to keep doing this more. Why does accuracy go up? It goes up because you've got more eyes on the problem. You've got everybody bringing their individual knowledge to validate every step of the logic, and that's just going to lead to a better outcome. We're not going to have this translation problem that James talked about earlier, where one or somebody on one side of the equation is going to interpret things one way. It's the wrong way, and they're going to make some codify some of that in logic that the other person's not going to see. The more transparency, the more collaboration, the more accuracy, and that just all leads to improved trust between the IT and business users. skill set, knowledge capture across teams. I said we should always ask every question the best way we've ever asked it. That's huge. You don't have to rely on individuals' tribal knowledge once you've gathered that knowledge and codified it into reusable assets that you can leverage across teams. The tool set, I'm going to get into that in a little bit more detail in a second because, well, hey, LavaStorm is a provider of these tool sets to tool the factory. The tool set encourages, if you choose these visual type data flow based tools, as James mentioned earlier from his research, the visual paradigm allows people to really intuitively collaborate and build these things together, and really to build them in real time, shrinking that cycle of what data do you need to what are you going to do with the data from a set of meetings and emails and requirements documents to a few people in a room with a projector building the thing live. That's tremendously important, both from getting something built quicker and identifying the issues and inaccuracies so that you can fix them. The tool set, if it is built to facilitate this, it's going to have that library of curated assets that are trusted data and trusted analytical routines so that the next time somebody tries to start up a project, they start at step 10 and not step 2. That really has an accelerative effect, not just the consistency, but the speed with which somebody can get where they want to go by leveraging what others have done before them. I said up front, as to James, that you can have all the most agile mindset, the most agile skill set in the world, but if you're not using tools that are built to foster the essential collaboration and change in the process, it's not going to work. What do these tools look like? Well, there's one of them. We are one. We're not the only one. But there is a breed of tools which replace the spreadsheet paradigm of rows and columns, which everybody understands, with a visual flow. You're modeling how the business logic affects the data, going left to right, gathering my data, and then adding or applying a whole bunch of different ETL transformations, analytical routines, visualizations to the data, so that I go from raw data to results and leave breadcrumbs behind. I leave a map, not just a written set of directions. That allows me to trace back when I find that something is amiss or something I don't understand, go all the way back and see where I went wrong, and then split off new logic and get it right. You contrast something like this with an assemblage of requirements documents, some well-documented SQL code, and some spreadsheets, and then some visual reports. That's a fragmented tool set. It does not lend itself to traceability because each one of those artifacts is severed from the other. But if everything is unified into a single, intuitive, visual workflow, people are going to be able to perform the types of agile analytical processes that we endeavor to have. It's solving not just the problem of getting people talking to each other and working together and codifying that, but clawing back some of that heterogeneous tool environment, standardizing around unified tools so that people can better communicate with each other because they've established a lingua franca in the software, not just in sort of methods and procedures that are imposed on them by the Center of Excellence. What does this look like in practice? I've chosen what I think is certainly a very compelling before and after from one of our customers. We do a lot of work in the financial services industry, and they have tremendous needs for analytical agility. They need to constantly respond to regulatory compliance requests, an ever-changing landscape of those things, so they need to build a lot of refreshes of how they report to regulators and how they report internally for auditors. They've just got a lot of customer experience driven and a retail banking facility initiatives where they want to make sure that they are capturing and retaining customers and spending as little money on that as possible to as great effect as possible. There's just a variety of different things that they need to do. This particular bank wanted to do a whole lot of things. They were hamstrung by the speed or the lack thereof between someone wanting to stand up a new project, which required new data sets, to someone actually being able to do something with it. It was on average, if they looked at the inbound requests from the line of business to service those requests for data, just data, forget about the analytics, just the data, 100 hours on average, and with the somewhat expensive resources that they had doing the problem, they could do about 200 of them a year. And when they got one of them wrong, it would be all the way back to step one, because each one of the data sets that they were provisioning out to the users was starting off from step zero. They weren't actually leveraging anything that they did. The 5 other times they got a similar data set, they were just starting all over again, traditional ETL approach, and that is certainly not good. And when they were working with the line of business was getting an answer, but they weren't getting any of the work. So it was difficult for them as they were trying to engender this trust and up the accuracy in concert with their business users to give visibility, give that traceability into this is where it came from, here's the work, oh, sorry, I got it wrong, I misinterpreted what you said, let's fix it right now. All of these things were a hindrance to them. It was costing them a lot of money. It was slowing them down. In a competitive market where analytics are a cornerstone of your competitive advantage and agility, the last thing you want to do is be waiting on results. And maybe by the time you get to where you thought you were, it's been outmoded by a change in business context or a change in the data or whatever. As we worked with them to have them adopt more agile processes and gave them the right tools to implement them, sea change over the course of about 6 months of work. So it happened pretty quickly. The flip side of this, the end result, their data requests went from 100 hours to 4 hours. I know that's hard to believe, but some of you who've been living this life, maybe it's not so hard to believe. Some of that was the first couple of times they did it might not have been 4 hours, it might have been 20 hours, but over time when you're re-leveraging the work that has gone before you, the incremental work to do one of these things can be really small. They more than doubled their ability to service the business. They probably would have gotten farther than that, but the business wasn't ready to give them more than 450 things because they didn't think that was possible. This is a little bit outdated. It's a few months old. Maybe they're up on a pace to do 700 a year. I don't know. And they did so with fewer resources doing it. They had expensive resources doing it. This is the last thing that those expensive resources wanted to do. They wanted to work on the next big IT project and build their new infrastructure for the data lake or whatever. They did not want to be in this process, so they were able to move those people, take cost out of this particular project, and still double their outcome. And they were reusing, as I've said a couple of times now, they're reusing when they need to build a new data set, they just build out of the pre-packaged, sort of Legos that they used the last time. There's a little bit of variation, but over time it's so accretive that they are able to just snap a few things together and boom, they've got data and they trust in the results. And that's the last thing. If you're using a shared visual canvas where you can show someone what's on the other side of that data set that you gave them in terms of logic and ETL, then you're going to be able to find out where things went wrong and engender a hugely improved trust level. Tying this all together, last slide, benefits. What does this translate to? I showed you a little bit of an example of what it translated to for that one particular bank, but in general, this is time to value. Getting a really quick start and being able to refine and hone these individual projects over time, continuously delivering value, not at the end, not 4 months into the project, but 2 weeks, 4 weeks into the project, because each Agile step is going to deliver new results, which could be themselves actionable, and get a lot of validation. That's the accuracy part. Every time you see a refresh of the data, you should be able to say, I trust it, or I don't. It doesn't comport with what I'm actually seeing. You need to go change it. That's fine. That's a feature, not a bug of the Agile approach. Adaptability. We're not going to, when we take these things that we've built in an Agile way and we industrialize them and make them operational analytics and processes that run every day, every hour in our business, continually delivering results, if we turn them into black boxes and they ran really fast and lights out, but we couldn't change them, that wouldn't be solving the problem. So this tool set needs to be able to not just foster the Agile front end of building these things, it needs to stay Agile as things change, as we learn new things, as data sources change. We need to be able to accommodate those changes. An Agile approach and the right tool set does that. So you start Agile and you stay Agile. Very, very important to adapt. Last thing, we bring the cost down. We allow more people to participate in building these things across skill sets and across experience sets. We reduce the cost of standing up each project. We're going to do more of them. The Center of Excellence is actually going to become this fantastic brokerage of building, doing more projects more quickly. So we're going to look in the corner of the business where we couldn't really cost justify standing up an analytical project to solve this problem because we didn't know if there was enough there to make it worthwhile. If it takes a short amount of time and not a lot of money, we're going to do more of that stuff. We'll make analytics pervasive, and we're going to get to a lot of unknown unknowns that, in aggregate, are actually going to have a huge effect on the business. So with that, I think we've got a few questions. We've got about 4 or 5 minutes to go through them. I've been talking for a long time. I'm going to take a drink of water, let James take the first question from the audience, and then we'll take it from there.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, James. Our first question from the audience is, if the Center of Excellence is to have authority, where must it report in the organization?
Yeah, great. So yeah, this is James. I think the short answer is, it can have authority and can have success anywhere. Of course, right, it's a matter of the mandate it gets and the people you have more than anything else. But where we have seen to be very successful, typically in a more strategic role, reporting to the office of the COO or reporting to, if your company has one, a chief data officer or a chief revenue officer. We find that to be very successful. Mark, I don't know if you see anything different.
Yeah, the chief data officer, the chief analytics officer is really, this is their remit, to stand up a centralized brokerage that is astride both the business and IT, so they can, have enough people working in their organization to staff it well and get people collaborating and have executive oversight and executive buy-in, so they can represent the analytical proficiency of the business at the executive level, and not just be a change agent, but allow, get the budgetary allocations that they need to fund these things. As James said, be prepared for success, be ready to grow this, the footprint of this organization. Someone with a C in their title is going to be well positioned to do that.
And lastly, can you verify that if everything is not in place, sponsorship, funding, staffing, then don't bother starting a Center of Excellence because it will not succeed? Is an analytics COE a case where there's, in fact, only do or do not?
Sure, yeah. So this is James again. I totally get the question, right? There's a chicken and egg problem, right? If you don't have, the buy-in, then why start? And if you don't start, then you'll never get the buy-in. I think the way to think about this is if the support doesn't come first, right? If it's not a top-down initiative saying, hey, look, we need to be more data-driven, let's get a COE. If it's sort of a grassroots campaign, then what you need to do is use the prototypes to prove value, to gain momentum, and use that as a proof point to go back and say, look what we did with these very limited resources. Here's what we could do if we were actually funded well, then get the buy-in. I think the way to think about it is don't flip the switch to prime time without the right resources in place. But I would be hard-pressed to say just don't start at all. I think use the prototypes as a building block to get it. I don't know if...
Yeah, I agreeing totally with James. If just because you build it doesn't mean they're going to come. And I've seen that where they say we're going to stand up an COE and we're going to tool ourselves and get all the infrastructure in place. And it doesn't go anywhere because they didn't have any customers. You have to co-op those first couple of grassroots, green shoots of grassroots movement, do the first couple of projects with them, and then build from there. And if you've adopted the mantra here of agility, you can start small and then you can scale up pretty nicely. But you got to have somebody who is going to work with you to prove out that first business case, rather than trying to build this centralized thing and then hope that you're going to be able to get people to buy in.
Great. Special thanks to Mark and James for today's content, and thanks to everybody who joined us for today's presentation. The folks that submitted questions that we did not get to, we will follow up with you, post this webinar privately, and we will get back to you. Again, thanks again for everybody's attendance, and we look forward to speaking with you all soon. Have a great day.